This episode of Ghost Maps was recorded on Audio-Technica mics. Ghost Maps. Entry 23. Ipoh, Malaysia. It's 2 a.m. and I'm sitting at a coffee place near Clarke Quay, sipping an overpriced flat white. Most of the people I speak to don't normally like to meet me this late, no matter how lively the location. Mazlan, however, says that he's a bit of a night owl. He works as a financial consultant back home in Ipoh, so he's had to adjust his sleep schedule since his days in boarding school, when late night study sessions were a norm amongst him and his classmates. He doesn't mind though, he says, with a genial smile as he takes his seat across from me, after picking up his mocha frappuccino from the counter. Mazlan's in Singapore for a holiday, so he can enjoy a coffee at this hour without worrying about getting to the office on time tomorrow morning. When a mutual friend of ours found out he'd be in town, she suggested that he share his story with me. See, Mazlan isn't a big guy. He's a little soft-spoken, with a gentle but warm demeanor, which is why, he tells me, that people are always a little surprised to learn that he used to play rugby in school, and he was pretty good at it too. But a knee injury ended any chance he had of pursuing it further. He jokes that he's actually a lot better at finances than he was at rugby anyway. I ask him if he tried to get physiotherapy for the knee, and he just shrugs, that affable disposition taking a bit of a dip. He tells me that he'd thought about it, but after what had happened to him, he wasn't as enthusiastic about the sport as he used to be. I take that as my cue and ask him to start from the beginning. It was a Thursday evening in April 2010. Like every other weeknight at around 8 p.m, Mazlan, a senior back then, was taking a stroll from his boarding school's dorm to the academic block. The block was never totally empty around this time. There'd always be a couple of study groups scattered around in different classrooms. This mix of company and quiet was the perfect environment for Mazlan to brush up on the day's lessons. Enough activity around him so he wouldn't get bored, but not enough to distract him. He would always take his time to get to the academic block though. Ipoh nights, he tells me, are particularly windy. Not chilly, but refreshing. He chuckles and says that these evening strolls are probably why he's such a night owl in the first place. As Mazlan reached the block, he saw that the lights were on in only 4 of the 22 classrooms, a lot fewer than usual. He thought nothing of it at the time and made his way to one of these rooms on the 2nd floor, where he found his friends Amran and Ishak. The pair wordlessly waved to Mazlan as he entered. They were sitting across from each other, but listening to music on their own MP3 players. Mazlan took a seat next to Amran, and for the next half an hour, the 3 students silently pored over their books. The only sound that filled the room was the occasional howling of the wind. Suddenly, however, the evening was interrupted by a loud bang as the classroom's door angrily slammed shut. It was a shock to all of them, but the wind had steadily grown stronger over the last 30 minutes, so it wasn't exactly unusual. What was unusual, Mazlan noted almost immediately, was that the doors for the other occupied classrooms hadn't slammed shut. He shrugged it off, but just as he tried to get back to his books, he heard a strange, steady, clacking sound, like metal on concrete. Strange, but also familiar. He tapped Amran on the shoulder. The other boy pulled out his earphones and asked Mazlan what was up. "Can you hear that?" Mazlan asked, but Amran had no idea what he was talking about. Not wanting to be left out of the conversation, Ishak pulled out his earphones too. When Mazlan asked him if he heard that clacking sound, the other boy shook his head, looking more confused than concerned. Mazlan, on the other hand, was starting to worry, if for no other reason than for his own sanity. He tried to be logical about it, convincing himself that he must have been much more tired than he thought. The faculty had always been pretty lax about when the boys needed to be in bed, so Mazlan was used to studying well past midnight. All those late nights must have finally taken a toll on him, he reasoned. Convinced that he wasn't going to be able to focus anymore, Mazlan packed his books, wordlessly waved goodbye to his friends, and headed back to the dorms. That clacking sound, thankfully, did not follow him. Not at first, anyway. The stronger winds, Mazlan soon realized, were clearly a precursor to heavy rain. So he decided to take another sheltered route back to the dorms. As he neared the dorms, however, that clacking sound returned, louder than before. It seemed to be coming from behind him and getting closer every second. More annoyed than scared now, Mazlan spun around and discovered why the noise sounded so familiar. Another student in rugby gear was jogging towards his direction, the metal cleats on the player's shoes striking the concrete path with each step. Clack, clack, clack. Mazlan let out a sigh of relief and almost wanted to laugh. The student wasn't someone that he knew. Probably a junior, he thought. There was something a little off about the student, though. Something that Mazlan couldn't quite place. Something about his neck. But before Mazlan could figure it out, the student had turned a corner and was out of sight. Mazlan shook off the thought and looked around to get his bearings. As expected, it had started to rain, but he could just about make out that the building in front of him was the infirmary. Mazlan says that, in retrospect, it's amazing how easily he shrugged off the inconsistencies and strangeness of that night. What was a lone rugby player doing there? He chuckles mirthlessly. Why did I hear that sound earlier, but Amran and Ishak didn't? I tell him that's a pretty common coping mechanism. That, a lot of times, people try not to see what's clearly in front of them. He shakes his head, still chastising himself for not realizing sooner. The following afternoon, during lunch, Mazlan asked some of his other classmates why they weren't around for an evening study session the night before. Everyone at the cafeteria table stopped what they were doing suddenly and glared at him. Yesterday was the anniversary, his friend Azhar said, staring at Mazlan like he should have known better. And he should have. It was the first story that every student heard from their seniors on their first day of school. Exactly 13 years ago to the day, the rugby team at the time was practicing in the rain. A rugger had been tackled a little too hard. He landed wrong, and his neck took the brunt of the impact. He was brought to the infirmary, where, while waiting for the ambulance, he asked for some water. Somehow, because of his injury, the water entered his trachea, and he choked to death. Since then, every year on that particular night, few students would dare to stay out late, for fear of seeing that rugger's spirit roaming the grounds. Mazlan lets out a sigh and says that it was just bad luck that he hadn't been paying attention to what the date was. I point out that this incident clearly hasn't deterred him from enjoying late nights. He laughs, that affable demeanor finally returning, and says with genuine affection, if you've ever experienced those wonderful, windy Ipoh nights, you'd understand why.
If you want to discover more of Southeast Asia's other side, subscribe now.